Hey guys, if you were born a child of the Spanish Habsburg court, well, first of all, congratulations, because your swaddling clothes are made from gold-threaded silk, and your cradle probably weighs more than your wet nurse. But also, condolences, because you've just been born into a dynasty where your smallest sneeze might be misinterpreted as heresy, and your entire life will be shadowed not just by oil paintings of dead relatives, but by an intricate, ceremonial, completely exhausting system of punishment, so elaborate it makes modern HR warnings feel like love notes. You probably won't survive this, but if you do, it'll be with straight posture, bowed head, and maybe a few ironic embroidery scars on your inner robes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your birth is a quiet event on the surface, as all good Habsburg rituals must be. Dignified, ceremonial, and attended by several people who are paid to pretend they're not judging the shape of your head. The midwives whisper in Castilian, and the priest is already preparing the documents that confirm you were baptized within 7 seconds of emerging. The room smells of rosewater, burning wax, and faintly of something more medical. Your mother lies still, silent, not because of serenity, but because protocol demands that even her groans be muffled by royal discretion. The moment your tiny lungs draw breath, a scribe in the corner notes the time. Another attendant begins wrapping you in white linen embroidered with tiny gold thread crosses, part religious protection, part royal branding. A physician holds you up like a fine ham at a market stall and declares, gravely, that your legs seem serviceable and your ears not overly cursed. Everyone exhales in relief. The Habsburg chin is present, but not aggressively so. You're placed in a cradle carved from walnut, inlaid with mother of pearl, and suspiciously heavy. A nurse pats you gently, while another holds up various blessed relics to ward off congenital sins. You sneeze, just once, but it's enough to prompt a footman to step forward with a basin of holy water. 1 drop for the soul, 1 for the tongue, 1 for the knee, just in case. From the moment you're wrapped, tagged, and blessed, your life begins not with love, but with regulation. A small bell is tied to your crib, not to soothe you, but to alert the nurse every time you shift, twitch, or cry out. If you cry for too long, she records it in a logbook. There's a column labeled wailing, excessive. There is no column for cried, because the swaddle is itchy. You are not so much raised as prepared. Your parents are not so much present as documented. They appear occasionally, like ghosts with powdered wigs, observing you from across the nursery, like you're an oil painting they're not supposed to touch. Your mother offers a gloved finger for you to grasp. Your father mutters something about duty and walks away to oversee the punishment of a valet who misaligned his boot buckles. The punishments begin early. Of course they do. When your eyes won't close during Mass, your nanny gently turns your head toward the tapestry of Saint Jerome, flagellating himself. When you spit up milk during a palace inspection, you are denied your coral teething ring for an entire afternoon. This, by the way, is considered quite severe, as the teething ring also contains a tiny silver bell meant to summon the wet nurse with a flick of the wrist. By 6 months, you're already being corrected. Not for crimes, of course. Babies are innocent. But for inclinations. The court believes character must be shaped early, like soft wax. And if your character leans toward fussiness or fidgeting, there are measures. You're made to sleep facing certain saints. Your lullabies are carefully edited for doctrinal purity. If you reach for the wrong object, your wrist is gently tapped with a peacock feather dipped in vinegar water. It smells like disappointment. You're weighed weekly. Your measurements are compared against those of previous infants in the line. If your height exceeds the expected curve, you're considered prone to arrogance. If you gain too much weight, it is believed to foreshadow sloth. Either way, there are adjustments. Less honey water, more silence. Your first few months pass in a haze of herbal baths, ritual fasting. For the nurse, you just get less, and endless sessions of being posed for portraits you'll never see. You develop a strong neck. You develop an even stronger instinct for when a room full of men in velvet robes is about to discuss your spiritual shortcomings. And then, at the age of 1, the real ceremony begins. The court of first infraction. It's symbolic, of course. You're too small to commit a real offense. But the Habsburg court insists that all infants must undergo a ritual correction, lest sin be allowed to root in the foundation of your being. So you are summoned, carried, really, into a small chamber with red curtains, 4 chairs, and a carved plaque that reads, "Nil sine poena." Nothing without punishment. The offense is chosen randomly. Yours is insolence in breath, which means, roughly, you cried during a sermon. You are dressed in miniature grey robes and placed on a velvet stool. The chamberlain reads a brief litany of your misdeeds, while you attempt to eat the hem of your sleeve. Then a small tap on the forehead with a silver spoon. The sentence is carried out. The punishment: you're denied music for 3 days, no lullabies, no harp at bath time. Your nurse hums silently with her mouth closed. You cry. It's noted again in the log. And so, your first year ends. Not with celebration, not with cake or toys, but with the satisfaction that you have been disciplined. Not because you were bad, but because the court believes that everyone, even an infant, is better after being slightly shamed. And you're just trying to fall asleep without a lullaby, wrapped in a cradle that smells like cedar, beneath a ceiling painted with cherubs that all seem to be watching and judging. By the time you're old enough to toddle across the tiled gallery floor, your shoes clicking like a metronome of impending decorum, you've already been punished twice for offenses you don't remember, and once for an expression they swore was too calculating. Your eyes apparently betray ambition, which in the Spanish Habsburg court is only acceptable if it's quiet, veiled, and ideally cloaked in Catholic remorse. The nursery is no ordinary room of toys and cuddles. It's more of a training salon, where play is tightly choreographed and monitored by nannies who keep tally marks in their apron pockets. Your rattle has been removed for arrogant clanking. The rocking horse is only available on penance days, and even then, only if you recite the court's modesty refrain. Silencio es nobleza, y nobleza no grita. Silence is nobility, and nobility does not shout. You are, by all accounts, a relatively healthy and entirely average child, but even average can be a threat here. One noble girl once had her privileges revoked for smiling too widely during a tapestry unveiling. The sin? Unmanaged joy. You commit your own version of that crime when you shriek with delight at your first taste of quince paste. Your nurse records it, the punishment. 1 hour seated on the observation cushion, a cushion made of stiff linen that leaves cross-hatch marks on your thighs. You're expected to meditate on humility. You spend the hour trying to scratch your leg with your elbow. Your caretakers wear stern faces and smell faintly of rose vinegar and burnt starch. They aren't unkind, just tightly wound by the coils of tradition. One of them, Doña Michaela, teaches you the art of penitential posture. Back straight, hands clasped loosely, eyes fixed on an invisible horizon. You practice in front of a cracked mirror until you can hold it for 30 minutes without blinking. It's a useful skill. The portraits of saints appreciate your effort. When you begin to speak, your first word is not mama or papa, but permiso, permission. It's no surprise. The court has already begun drilling you with phrases like perdón, su señoría, and no fue mi intención. You repeat these even in your sleep. One night, you mutter, yo confieso into your bolster pillow, and the night maid crosses herself without waking you. Toys are rare and heavily supervised. You receive a single carved wooden lamb, which you are allowed to pet for 7 minutes each morning. If you stroke it too firmly, it is removed for precautionary reverence. The lamb wears a tiny collar with your initials, and the day you leave a fingerprint on its flank, you're assigned to drawing practice as a corrective measure. You spend the next 3 afternoons sketching the lamb from memory, under the supervision of a stern old man with one eyebrow and no tolerance for perspective errors. Your parents appear occasionally, usually during presentation rituals. They wear magnificent brocade robes and smell like civet and dust. They don't ask you how you're feeling. They ask whether you remember the 7 approved table graces and whether you've yet memorized the 12 symbolic gestures for bodily stillness. You nod. They nod. Then they walk away, satisfied. You eat in silence, even as a toddler. Meals are punctuated by the gentle clink of pewter spoons and the occasional murmur of apology when someone spills. You're fed watery soup and bits of bread soaked in goat's milk. One day, you let out an accidental belch, and your high chair is turned away from the table for the duration of the meal. You chew quietly while facing a tapestry of Saint Dominic administering penance to a donkey, and yet somehow you thrive. You become agile in the rituals, nimble in the punishments. You learn to cry silently. You develop the unique courtly skill of swallowing your laughter whole and blinking it into a single tear. You grow adept at curtsying from the waist without upsetting your bunting. You learn that clapping is forbidden, but that you may express approval by lowering your eyes and exhaling through your nose with moderate reverence. Sometimes punishment feels more like performance. Your favorite nanny, one with soft hands and a quiet cough, tells you bedtime stories about children in other countries who don't get punished ceremonially. You gasp. It sounds wild, free, dangerous. In France, she whispers, they let children nap wherever they want. You shake your head in disbelief. You've napped nowhere, but you're assigned cot since birth. And even then, only after a prayer and the symbolic flick of the lavender wand of restfulness, which a footman waves above your blanket each afternoon. Your dreams are shaped by ceremony. You dream of embroidered scrolls floating above your crib, listing your infractions in shimmering thread. You dream of slipping up, forgetting to bow before an icon, or letting your sock droop, and waking to find a tiny silver bell tied to your toe as a reminder. Even your play becomes tinged with consequence. One afternoon, you try to stack your ceramic letter tiles into a tower. When it falls, you accidentally say, "Oh, Dios," too sharply. A nearby tutor marks it down. You are sent to the reflection mat, a slightly damp square of woven reed beneath the staircase. You sit there, listening to your own heartbeat and the distant echoes of organ practice from the chapel. On the day of your 3rd birthday, instead of a party, you receive a miniature scroll with the seal of San Esteban's chapel. It is your first official summons. The charge: consistent, high-toned vocalization during rest hours. The punishment: no honey water for 5 days. You nod solemnly. You hadn't liked honey water much anyway, and so your baby crimes continue. Not because you are malicious, but because the court has an unlimited imagination for error. You grow up under the weight of ritual, and still you stretch, slowly, toward personhood. Each small rebellion, dropping a spoon too loudly, wriggling too long in your chair, becomes a marker of your humanity. But for now, you're only a child. A child who knows 20 forms of apology, has bowed to 47 portraits, and has never once laughed out loud without permission. And somehow you're still smiling on the inside. Quietly, of course. You're 3 years old when the doctrine of tiny obedience is officially introduced into your daily routine. Of course, it's always been there, hovering over your days like a scented veil of lavender, starch, and impending consequence. But now it has a name. It's spoken aloud by your tutors, murmured by the footmen, embroidered on the edge of your morning serviette. Obediencia pequeñita, para una alma grandiosa. Little obedience for a great soul. You commit the phrase to memory before you even fully understand it, though it sounds suspiciously like a threat wrapped in velvet. Each morning begins with recitation. You sit cross-legged on a square of wool, fell that smells faintly of rosemary and moths, facing a silver basin filled with holy water. You're taught to look at your reflection in the basin and whisper, "Hoy no decepcionaré." Today, I shall not disappoint. It's not a wish. It's a warning. The basin does not smile back. Breakfast is a silent affair, taken under the watchful gaze of a faded fresco depicting Saint Agatha offering her severed breast on a plate. It's not the most comforting mural for a child, but it certainly reinforces the concept of sacrifice. Your spoon is wood, not silver. Children are not permitted metal utensils until they reach the age of comprehension, usually around 8. You once asked what would happen if you tried to use a fork early. The answer: you would be corrected. That's all they said. You never asked again. The punishment scale is introduced gradually, one infraction at a time. The hierarchy is complex, color-coded, and governed by a series of small tokens kept in a velvet pouch, worn by your primary tutor, Don Leandro. For every misstep, murmuring during prayers, failing to finish your porridge, tilting your head disrespectfully, you are awarded a marker of error. Each token corresponds to a level of correction. Yellow for gentle reminders, red for formal penance, black for silent shame. You earn your first red token for using your left hand to wave at a portrait of Saint Isabel. It is retrieved from the pouch with dramatic slowness, placed in your palm and left there until nap time. It feels heavier than it looks. You quickly learn the gestures of deference. Palms open, eyes lowered, spine straight. Slouching is interpreted as defiance. Squirming is associated with rebellious thoughts. Even yawning is discouraged, unless done behind a fan or a folded linen handkerchief, and never audibly. You master the art of discreet fatigue, learning to mask boredom behind serene stillness. It's impressive, really. You could teach a class on it, if, of course, classes were ever taught by 4-year-olds. The doctrine of the tiny obedience dictates not just what you do, but how you do it. When washing your hands, the water must be poured precisely. One ladle for the right, one for the left. If you splash, you're assigned extra hand-purifying drills. You once spent an entire afternoon in the washroom of regret, rinsing and re-rinsing your fingers while a nun named Sister Remedios watched silently from behind a silk screen. Her presence alone made you scrub harder. Disobedience is rarely punished through pain. No, pain is considered inelegant, too brutish for a child of such lineage. Instead, you're taught through distance. The most feared correction is withdrawal. You commit a second-level error, forgetting to bow after sneezing, and for 3 days, your favorite tutor pretends you do not exist. No eye contact, no greetings, no guidance. It is a void colder than stone. You would rather be thumped with a candlestick. The only place that offers slight reprieve is the Library of Conduct. It's a long hall filled with illustrated manuscripts that depict children undergoing various moral corrections, often through allegory. One book features a rabbit who steals a plum and is forced to wear a hat made of vinegar-soaked feathers. Another tells the tale of a girl who eats her fig before prayer and wakes up with a tongue made of beeswax. You read these with great seriousness, analyzing their absurdity with the solemnity of a philosopher. One day, you are summoned to the cloister of Reformation, a quiet room with high windows and no chairs. There, you're instructed to sit on your heels and repeat the 10 manners of the quiet soul. These include: do not interrupt birdsong, walk as if others are watching, and never laugh in uneven rhythm. That last one confuses you. You ask what an uneven laugh is. You are met with a raised eyebrow and no answer. Apparently, asking questions is suspicious. You begin keeping a secret list of your own. A list of rules that no one has said aloud, but that you figured out by observing the faces of the people around you. Such as: never let your sleeves fall past your wrists when speaking. Never touch bread with both hands unless it's blessed. Never whistle. Ever. Always pause before entering a room, as if waiting for invisible applause to finish. You wonder how many of these are real. You don't dare ask. Sometimes children are made examples. Your friend Nicholas forgets to remove his hat before a painting of Charles V. His punishment, one day in the Chamber of Echoes, where every word he says is repeated back at him in a slightly disappointed tone by the servants behind a curtain. He comes back silent. He does not forget again. You become adept at reading the air. A flick of someone's sleeve tells you it's a day for extra stillness. A crooked candle means your spoon must not clink. Even the sound of the distant bell, too fast, too sharp, alerts you that a correctional mood is sweeping the hallways. And still you grow. You eat quietly. You sleep deeply, always with one hand resting on your token pouch, as if ready to pay penance even in your dreams. You start to understand that every motion you make is being folded into a long, invisible ledger, one that will follow you all your life until you are too old to be punished and are simply left alone. For now, though, you remain firmly within the embrace of the doctrine. You don't rebel. You comply. You float through the halls like a miniature ghost in training. And deep down, beneath all that quiet, you're beginning to wonder what it might feel like to dance out of rhythm. Just once, you're 5 years old when you meet the whipping bench. Not personally, yet, but ceremonially. It stands at the far end of the instructional hall, a low, polished slab of oak covered in embroidered cushions. To the untrained eye, it could be mistaken for a place of rest. It is not. You're told its true purpose during your first morning in the court school for the children of blood. Don Leandro leans down with a smile that's all eyebrows and no warmth and says, "This is where small minds become upright." You nod, though you don't know what that means. You will. Your daily routine begins with the ringing of the 5 bells, a musical chime intended to call each child to their appointed circle. You are part of the circle of modest ambition, along with 7 other children who, like you, have been classified as neither particularly gifted nor dangerously clever. This is seen as a blessing. Instruction happens in stages and always under watch. You are given slates to trace the sacred alphabet, styluses carved from the bone of former palace scribes, an honor, supposedly, and pages to recite, filled with phrases like, "Pride without purpose is wind without sail." You learn your letters, but more importantly, you learn to speak softly while learning them. If your voice rises above the murmur threshold, a tutor rings a brass bell and gently places a leather strap on the bench beside you. A suggestion, not a threat, not yet. Mistakes are not met with shouting. That would be too common, too bourgeois. Instead, they are met with silence, followed by consequence. One day, you smudge your copybook. It's only ink, barely more than a comma's width of error. But you're called forward. Your heart races like a court drum roll. You're not beaten, not at 5, but you're made to sit on the whipping bench for the remainder of the lesson. Back straight, hands folded, while the rest of the class recites hymns. It is not pain you feel, it is theater. You are the cautionary example. You do not cry. Around you, other punishments unfold. A boy named Matteo yawns without covering his mouth, and is assigned an entire week of mirror practice, forced to observe himself in silent reflection while performing the 9 gestures of penitent restraint. A girl named Blanca forgets the Latin term for humility and is required to compose a hymn in praise of silence. She performs it before the class while holding a candle made of stiffened beeswax and regret. It becomes clear. Learning is secondary to obedience. The benches are cold in winter. There are no cushions unless earned through a month without tokens of shame. You do not qualify. You earn a yellow token every time you fail to respond to the call and response catechism with the correct amount of solemnity. Once you answer, present in soul and body, with too much eagerness. The tutor pauses. You're asked to repeat it in a lower tone. You comply. You learn. You begin to fear the sound of quills. Not the scratching, but the pausing. When a tutor stops writing mid-lesson, it usually means someone has faltered. Eyes scan. Someone is about to be corrected. You make a game of it in your mind, guessing who it will be. You're often right. Don Leandro keeps a switch near the back of the room. It's never used. It's not meant to be. Its presence is the true punishment. You glance at it daily, imagining its weight, the swish it would make in air, and the knowledge that no one ever screams here. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because screaming is discouraged. You're taught ethics as performance. There are lessons in posture, deportment, and penance. You learn to kneel with precision. Right knee first, 3 seconds down, hands over heart. If your timing is off, you must repeat the sequence 30 times. You've done it 68 times in a single day. You now kneel in your sleep. Afternoons are for philosophical correction. A monk named Brother Isidoro reads you tales of ancient wrongdoers, Roman generals who disobeyed orders and were forced to eat in the dark, or Visigoth children who boasted too loudly and were sentenced to a year without mirrors. You're expected to respond with commentary. Once, you suggest that the Roman general may have had good reason. The room goes silent. You are excused from the session and made to recite obedience before opinion 100 times while facing the fresco of Saint Cecilia, gagged with a scroll. Even leisure is structured. You are given recreation hours twice a week, which involves slow walking in the Garden of Temperance. You are allowed to speak, but only in questions. It's meant to inspire curiosity. Instead, it inspires caution. Your favorite safe question becomes, what is the proper way to fold a serviette when no one is watching? No one answers. By 6, your handwriting is impeccable. Your pronunciation is flawless. You can recite entire stanzas of ceremonial verse backward if asked. You have also developed a slight tremor in your left eye, which a passing friar blames on excessive self-awareness. He congratulates you. The whipping bench is no longer a stranger. You've sat on it 7 times, once for whispering during embroidery, once for sneezing without excusing yourself in Latin, and 5 times for infractions so minor they were explained only with sighs and a flick of the wrist. You don't resent it. You've come to see it as a kind of sibling, stoic, unforgiving, but always there. And yet, despite all this, you are not crushed. You learn, you grow, you tuck your rebellion into the folds of your tunic and press it flat each morning. You save it for your thoughts, for the quiet corners, for the moments no one is watching, because somewhere, deep within you, beneath the slate and the ink, the posture drills and the benedictions, the kneeling and the whispers, there is a part of you that still wants to laugh out loud with joy and not apologize for it. At the age of 7, you receive your first official punishment robe. It's a dull gray, lined with stiff wool, deliberately itchy at the collar. The sleeves are too long on purpose, meant to inhibit gesturing, lest you accidentally express enthusiasm. On the back is stitched a black embroidered emblem. A single closed eye, the symbol of awakened restraint. You're instructed to wear it for 3 days, after misplacing your psalm book during midday inspection. It had simply slipped between 2 floor tiles. But intent, as the court declares, is not required for error. Only error is. The robe is not painful, but it is shameful. And that, as you've come to learn, is the currency of correction. While others laugh during recreation hour, you shuffle in your robe of silence, arms crossed beneath the oversized sleeves. You are not forbidden to speak, but anyone wearing the eye is expected to choose silence. When you so much as open your mouth to ask for a pear slice at lunch, a server bows slightly and reminds you with a whisper. Even thought should be still. You nod. The hunger stays. Punishments at court are rarely spontaneous. They are ceremonial, deliberate, and astonishingly diverse. You observe their forms like a naturalist studying species. There is the ribbon of regret, pinned to the tunics of those who forget titles when addressing clergy. There is the sand hour when a child must kneel on coarse grit for the length of a bell cycle. There is the cloak of heat, worn in midsummer as reminder to those who disrespected the comfort of others. You see each one used. You catalogue them internally. You even begin to rank them. The punishment robe, you decide, is a 6 out of 10. Unpleasant, but manageable. The silent table earns an 8. Imagine eating with 6 others, while not a single sound is permitted, not even chewing. If your jaw clicks, you're assigned water reflection time. Water reflection time is difficult. It involves staring into a basin of water for precisely 33 minutes, while whispering apologies to your own face. You must maintain eye contact with your reflection. If you blink too often, you are accused of evasion. If you weep, your tears are added to the basin, and you are praised for emotional accountability. You experience this once after failing to identify the correct saint in a mural's corner. It's Saint Eustace. You'll never forget him again. By now, the other children have learned to spot infractions before they occur. One lifts a napkin too early. 4 eyes glance up. Another speaks too soon during the collective mercy. A collective inhalation. Correction is everyone's business. You are your brother's keeper. And your brother is also your snitch. You begin to internalize the system so thoroughly that you correct yourself before others do. You whisper apologies to doorknobs. You hesitate before entering even empty rooms. Once, you catch yourself bowing to your own shadow. During this time, your studies shift toward ethics and comportment. You're given miniature scrolls of behavioral philosophy, boiled down into rhymed couplets and strange metaphors. One reads, "To spill your drink is to spill your soul. A still hand leads to noble goal." Another declares, "The tongue is sharpest when let roam, so let it sleep before it's home." You recite them nightly, sometimes in your dreams. Your punishments become more theatrical. One week, a boy named Hernando forgets to kneel before entering the chapel of quiet fountains. As penance, he's dressed in a tunic of feathers and told to feel the judgment of birds. The tunic is absurd, plucked from old costumes and stiff with starch. And yet, no one dares laugh. Laughter would only earn you a chance to wear it next. You witness the ceremony of unspoken offense too, a mysterious correction where a child is summoned without explanation and returned with no details offered. The air around them becomes heavy. Everyone watches them closely, searching for clues. The ambiguity itself becomes the punishment. You dread the day you might be chosen. When your time comes, it is for something tiny. You are accused of thoughtful delay. You had paused too long after being asked to recite the rule of repose. Perhaps you were sleepy. Perhaps you were forming the words. But in court, delay suggests hesitation. Hesitation suggests doubt. Doubt is dangerous. You are summoned to the hall of measured gait. There, you are instructed to walk in slow, perfect steps along a long marble corridor. Each step must match the pace of a swinging pendulum suspended from the ceiling. Fall behind and a bell chimes. Step ahead, and a soft sigh escapes the curtain. You walk that hall for an hour. By the end, your calves ache, and your thoughts have slowed to match the rhythm. You exit with a new appreciation for tempo, for restraint, for fear that wears the face of order. Despite it all, you remain strangely proud. When you speak, your tone carries the weight of knowing. When you move, it is with elegance, shaped by 1,000 small humiliations. You have become fluent in the language of courtly self-correction. You have learned that even breath must be curated. Still, when you close your eyes at night, beneath a mural of angels holding scrolls of reprimand, you dream of something else. A hallway with no pendulum, a table where you can chew without judgment, a robe that itches only because it was poorly sewn, not to punish, but because someone simply didn't know better. And in that dream, you laugh freely, loudly, and not a single bell chimes in reply. You are 9 years old the first time you are assigned a role in a punishment reenactment tableau, a charming little invention of the Habsburg court, where past disciplinary acts are staged like miniature plays, not for enjoyment, but for moral instruction. These are not dramatizations of grand betrayals or royal treason, mind you, but of small, everyday failings. A slouched curtsy, a misplaced handkerchief, the slow bow of a distracted page. You, it turns out, are selected to play the girl who walked too fast, past the cardinal's door. It's not a glamorous role. You wear a sash embroidered with the word apresurada, the hurried one, and are instructed to cross the courtyard no faster than a goose in procession. You must repeat this passage 12 times, while an audience of your peers murmurs the chant, "Let the pace match the grace." You are not permitted to look up. If your ankles show, it counts as a second offense. A boy named Teodoro watches with silent judgment, recording your posture with a feather quill taller than his face, and still. This is not the worst of it, because now that you are nearly 10, your punishments have graduated from the symbolic to the psychological. There's a new system, interpersonal corrections. Instead of simply receiving a consequence, you must now act as the moral compass for others. If someone fails in decorum, you're expected to respond. Not with scolding, but with reflection. The preferred method is to hand them a card with an inked phrase such as, "I noticed your spirit wandered," or "Let us remember the stillness of Saint Ramon." You're not allowed to explain the card. You simply hand it, bow slightly, and walk away. You hate these cards, and you hate how good you are at using them. You begin to notice tiny infractions before they fully form. The twitch of impatience in a classmate's foot, the eager reach toward the grape bowl at dinner, the flutter of a smile when nothing humorous has occurred. You hand out correction cards like a somber little oracle. You do not smile. You are praised for your vigilance. In return, others begin to correct you. You once look out a window too long, caught in a rare moment of distraction, watching a bird bathe in a cracked stone basin, and the next morning, you find a card tucked under your porridge bowl. Beauty should not distract from duty. You feel exposed, but you nod. The system works. Your handwriting has now achieved what the tutors call chastened elegance. Each letter is perfectly looped, but devoid of flourish. You no longer doodle in your margins. That was corrected months ago, when a scroll was returned to you with a note written in invisible ink. It became visible only under heat, and when you held it near the hearth, the message appeared. There are eyes everywhere. Since then, your margins have remained pristine. You're also introduced to the practice of suppressed applause. You are permitted to express approval, but only through gestures approved by the office of mute affirmation. The most common are 3 blinks in succession, a slight tilt of the chin, or the folding of hands over the heart for the count of 5. Clapping is vulgar. Smiling is permitted, but only with closed lips and no visible teeth. Laughter, as ever, must be inward. You observe a boy punished for smiling while a goose honks near the chapel. The goose, clearly, was the one being funny, but laughter must only come from the soul, not from impulse. The boy spends 3 days wearing a mask that conceals his mouth and ears, labeled receptor of unmeasured delight. You do not laugh at the goose, you bow to it. Now that your days include service, you're often assigned to the etiquette pantry, where scrolls of protocol are stored in alphabetical order. You help dust the volumes, bind the ones with frayed ribbon, and polish the brass corners of the shelves. You read as you work. One scroll titled "Apologies Appropriate for Accidental Eye Contact" includes 17 different phrasings, depending on rank, time of day, and ambient noise level. You memorize 10 of them without trying. One afternoon, a tutor quizzes you on proper responses to hypothetical disasters. The scenario: if a cardinal sneezes during grace and your plate is already warm, what is the correct reaction? You answer, bow once, say, salud en silencio, then delay your first bite until the 3rd spoonful. You are praised. The other child is told to repeat the table blessings in a corner until he understands consequence. He weeps silently. It is considered an improvement. You're no longer corrected in private. The system of public rectitude has begun. Corrections are now documented in the court's youth behavior ledger, an enormous bound volume kept on a brass pedestal in the Hall of Stilled Joy. At the end of each week, exemplary children are summoned to hear their names read aloud. Errors are recited gently, followed by a note of gratitude for the opportunity to improve. You're mentioned 6 times in a month. It's an honor. It's mortifying, but perhaps the most strange and strangely effective punishment introduced this year is echo rehearsal. It works like this. You are brought to a narrow stone corridor with curved acoustics. A tutor reads aloud a phrase you once spoke in error, and you must repeat it back until the tone, volume, and cadence reflect complete understanding. Your misphrased comment, "I thought the portrait looked tired," is dissected, echoed, softened, and refined until it becomes, "The portrait carries the dignity of time." You repeat that final sentence 27 times. By the end, you believe it. Still, beneath all of this, the rituals, the cards, the stillness training, the silent apologies, and echo correction, your mind continues to play. You imagine what would happen if someone walked backward into the grand chapel, if someone clapped at the end of prayer, if someone looked at a cardinal and simply said, "No, you never act on these thoughts," but you keep them like contraband candy beneath your pillow. And that alone, in this place, feels almost like freedom. By the age of 10, you are inducted into the Circle of Regulated Mirth, a cohort formed to monitor, document, and modulate displays of joy within the younger quarters of the Spanish Habsburg court. It is not an honor. It is a test. Those who fail to govern their cheer are reassigned to the division of measured lamentations. You accept the appointment with a nod and a forced smile that is carefully calibrated to show grace but not glee. Your duties begin with the assessment of permissible delight, a daily task involving a scroll listing activities allowed to provoke contentment. These include the watching of sunbeams on tile floors, briefly, the listening of harpsichord trills, in minor key only, and the ceremonial folding of napkins into animal forms, provided the resulting shapes appear sufficiently solemn. Anything beyond this is deemed excessive buoyancy. You are provided with a set of painted tokens, each illustrating an emotion and its acceptable intensity. There is mild satisfaction, a pale green token with a barely smiling face, quiet gratitude, a hand placed over a chest, and the ever-popular pleasant compliance, a blank circle. You're required to carry these and display them when asked to explain your mood. Mislabeling your own emotion results in a consultation with the emotional steward. This is where you first encounter the chair of recalibration. It is not a chair for rest. It is a listening device, shaped like a high-backed throne, with gently padded arms and a tilted headrest. But embedded into the arms are 2 cold brass discs, and when you place your hands upon them, a bell is struck. The steward asks a question. What gave you joy today? You must answer while maintaining full contact. If your tone is too light or your answer flippant, The bell rings again, and you must begin anew. The goal is to reach what they call emotional equilibrium, a joy that hums rather than soars, like a candle flickering in a sealed chapel. Most children weep in the chair. You simply shiver. Outside of official joy monitoring duties, you continue your education. Latin lessons have shifted toward legal and punitive phrasing. You now translate excerpts from treatises on domestic governance and aristocratic misdemeanors. Your favorite phrase, which you write 3 times too many in the margins, is correctio dulcis, poena tacita. Gentle correction, silent punishment. You whisper it to yourself while washing your hands. Hand washing, by the way, has been elevated to near sacrament. You must now perform it with a 3-chant rhythm. 1 for the body, 1 for the soul, 1 for the lineage. The soap is made with ash and rose water. The towel is embroidered with reminders. Clean hands carry clear thoughts. You once dry your fingers on your sleeve. You are assigned reflection through stagnant water. 5 minutes spent staring into a still basin in silence, meditating on the ripple you did not deserve. Your sleep is monitored too. The court has instituted the doctrine of drowsy awareness, a gentle correction designed to prevent overly cheerful dreams. Each child now records their sleep posture and mood upon waking, then submits it on a scroll for review. If you report a dream with too much dancing, you are asked to walk barefoot for a day to restore groundedness. You do not dream of dancing anymore. Instead, you dream of the color room. It is an imaginary place, born in a half-lucid nap during poetry recitation. In the color room, nothing is beige or gray or starch-colored. Everything hums. The walls breathe. The windows wink. There are no tokens to measure your feelings. No corrections folded into every napkin. You visit the color room often now, though you never speak of it. That alone could be considered a breach. Back in waking life, punishments continue to evolve. There is the corridor of regretful shoes, where children must walk back and forth, wearing clogs filled with beans. Each step a reminder to tread carefully in life. A boy named Isandro is sent there for expressing too much pride in finishing a hymn early. He returns quieter, with the sound of beans echoing in his gate for days. There is the quiet choir, an ensemble where only silent mouthing is permitted. You are selected to perform. You stand in rows, mouthing Hosanna without sound, while a nun counts how many syllables you complete with your eyes closed. Joyful noise is forbidden. Only joyful posture is allowed. One evening during supper, you are handed a scroll. It is a notice of preemptive correction. These are rare and feared. It states that your energy pattern suggests impending laughter. The document notes a slight upward curve to your lips, observed that morning during spoon placement. You must spend the evening in the Hall of Still Faces, sketching your own profile from memory until your features are appropriately composed. You are 10 years old, and yet the rules do not crush you. They sharpen you. You know how to curtsy without shaking. You can deliver a greeting with the precise number of syllables appropriate to an archduke's second cousin. You sense the tremor of mood before it arrives. Like a hound detecting a storm, you have become what they want, and still, deep beneath all that, beneath the ceremonial robes, the measured smiles, the candles that flicker exactly 4 times before extinguishing. A tiny piece of you giggles, quietly, disobediently, just enough. You do not share it, but you hold it, like a seed in winter. Your 12th birthday passes with the sound of a single bell rung 3 times. Once for the body, once for the lineage, once for the mind. There is no cake, no candles, and certainly no singing. Instead, you're gifted a scroll of formative discretion, bound in crimson ribbon and inscribed with the opening phrase, "You are now of age to understand discretion is the first veil of wisdom." It's a thrilling disappointment. 12 marks the beginning of punitive apprenticeship. You are no longer merely corrected. You are now expected to help administer correction. Not physically, of course. The court frowns on contact. Your tool is observation, your weapon a finely tipped inkwell, and your battleground is the ledger of small deviations. You are told to document infractions of atmosphere, slight disruptions of tone, rhythm, or mood that suggest the faintest ripple in the court's still waters. Your first assignment is in the antechamber of composed posture, a narrow space between the chapel of forbearing saints and the hall of controlled crumbs. There, you sit at a high stool beside a page who smells perpetually of damp velvet. Your duty is to mark down each time someone adjusts their belt, sneezes without pre-apology, or crosses their arms, a sign of inward rebellion. Each mark earns a subtle correction the next morning. An extra embroidery session, a smaller bowl of broth, or a brief public reading of one's own virtues and failings. You begin to understand the true architecture of punishment. It is not about pain. It is about the gentle, constant nudging of the spirit until it aligns with a shape it never chose. You begin keeping 2 ledgers, one official, one personal. The first records the sanctioned errors of others. The second is filled with imagined infractions, curious contradictions, and strange court behaviors that no one else seems to question. Like why the cardinal always twitches his eye during the candle procession, or why the maid, with the crooked nose, always hums during lacing, or how sometimes, when no one's watching, you see the portrait of Queen Mariana tilt ever so slightly, as if it too has grown tired of standing still. You're also taught the technique of contrapuntal silence, a social maneuver wherein you counter someone's impolite thought by saying nothing at all, but in a manner that causes them to reflect inwardly for hours. You practice this during tea time when a boy next to you reaches for a biscuit before the blessing of breads is complete. You lower your eyes, pause your breath, and withhold movement. He notices. He falters. He replaces the biscuit. You never speak of it. You are congratulated by a passing steward with a single nod. Alongside all this, you now attend punitive history lectures in the lower vault of forgotten deeds. There, under flickering torchlight and a low ceiling that drips with mold in the shape of saints, you are taught the ancestral errors of those who came before. Each story ends the same way, with a punishment so elaborate it becomes legend. You hear of a lady-in-waiting who once whispered too loudly during a foot-washing rite and was sentenced to wear socks filled with ink for a season. You study the Duke of Lavanda, who declined to bow during a thunderstorm and was made to wear a lightning rod crown, ceremonial, but deeply embarrassing. And of course, the infamous Viscount of Portales, who smiled at a joke told by a juggler and was sent to live among the mute monks for 7 years to reflect on the nature of gravity. Your favorite, though, is the case of the crooked fork. A boy named Arturo, perhaps your age, accidentally bent a fork while eating pears. Rather than scold him, the court made him teach a weekly seminar titled The Fragility of Implements and Ideals, in which he had to praise the virtues of straightness in all things, holding his crooked fork like a relic of personal failure. The class was so moving, it was added to the curriculum. Arturo eventually left the court, but his seminar remains. You attend it every Thursday. As you grow into your height and lose the soft puffiness of early childhood, you notice the adults observing you differently. Tutors pause longer at your responses. The steward begins assigning you to tasks with political sensitivity, like escorting visiting nobles' children during ceremonial silence, or monitoring the mood of foreign pages. You are praised for your tact, your lack of visible joy, and your ability to suppress yelps when scolded by spilled tea. You are given a badge, a small pin shaped like a closed mouth. It means trusted with stillness. You begin to notice others noticing your badge. One girl looks away when she sees it. A younger boy bows too deeply. You dislike the badge. You also polish it daily, despite all the structure, the schedule, the echoing chant of correctio sine clangore, correction without clamor. You remain aware that beneath the grey robes and whispered reprimands, life is still occurring. You start writing a story. It's secret, of course, tucked beneath the lining of your quilted blanket, written with a borrowed quill and lemon juice, so it remains invisible until warmed. The story is absurd, full of roaring laughter and rogue bishops who ride storks through burning halls of etiquette. You call it the grin of Saint Euphrasia. In your story, Saint Euphrasia defeats an entire court session by dancing backwards through a rulebook while juggling broken forks. You laugh while writing it, quietly, but freely. One evening, while dusting the scroll room, you hear a tutor murmur to another, "That one's too calm. It'll crack or ascend. Either way, not ours for long." You pretend not to hear, but you do, and it sounds just barely like hope. By 13, your posture is flawless. Not excellent, flawless. You can stand for 2 hours without shifting weight. You can curtsy on a moving barge. You can pour tea without a single ripple disturbing the surface, even when the cup is cracked and your fingers are stiff from pre-dawn discipline drills. This is the year you're introduced to punishments of poise, those exquisitely mundane corrections designed not to hurt the body, but to recalibrate presence. Your first such sentence is mild, the stillness of the candlestick. For 3 consecutive mornings, you must stand in the corner of the Eastern Chapel, holding a brass candle holder with one hand, elbow gently bent, wrist aligned to the curvature of the statue of Saint Isabel. You may not move, blink excessively, or shift your gaze. The candle is unlit because lit flames would attract moths, and moths are, quite frankly, chaos incarnate. You come to understand that the true aim of these punishments is not to correct misbehavior, but to preserve aesthetic control. Every child in the court is a gesture, a symbol, an echo of a symmetrical dream. You are not expected to feel, only to embody. The real dread comes later, though, with your first assignment to the mirror room. It's not actually a room full of mirrors, just one, tall and narrow, slightly warped with age, mounted on a slate wall beneath a flickering oil lamp. You are led there after a minor infraction. Your nod during the third benediction was deemed too vigorous. You remember the moment well. The sunlight had caught the dust in the air just right, and you felt swept. Not joyous, just slightly lifted. Apparently that was too much. In the mirror room, you are made to sit, alone, in silence. You must stare at your own reflection for precisely 55 minutes. No fidgeting, no humming. The steward calls it the lesson of symmetry. You are meant to identify the irregularities in your own posture and correct them, not physically, but mentally. Poise, they say, begins in the thought before it touches the limb. You find this terrifyingly effective. For the next week, your body obeys instructions before you give them. Your shoulder adjusts mid-thought. Your jaw relaxes before the need arises. You begin to anticipate your own tension. That same week, you are allowed to observe the Tribunal of Gentle Errors, a monthly gathering in which 3 minor transgressors are tried. Not in judgment, but in consultation. The accused are seated on velvet stools. A panel of 3 courtiers, each holding a parasol of varying opacity, asks them questions like, "What color was your thought when you disobeyed?" Or, "How did your feet betray your intention?" It's part art installation, part confession. One girl admits she liked the way her hair looked in the polished floor. She is sentenced to wear a cap of translucent linen for a fortnight so as not to tempt herself. The judgment is considered merciful. You spend increasing amounts of time copying manuals of noble restraint, century-old documents written in cramped, spiraling script. Your favorite chapter is titled, "How to Diminish the Self While Maintaining Dignity." The first sentence reads, "To be a shadow without sulking, to fade without fleeing." This is grace. You begin adopting the habit of non-existent entry, a subtle practice in which you enter a room without drawing any sensory attention. Not a footfall, not a sigh, just the soft echo of presence. You practice it during evening scroll sorting, and once, quite by accident, you cause a nun to drop a picture. You are punished not for startling her, but for enjoying the moment. The punishment is the lecture of still rain, a spoken monologue performed to you by a veteran courtier, delivered in the soft cadence of falling drizzle. You are to sit and listen, eyes closed, hands folded, for 90 minutes. If your breathing is too loud, the lecture repeats. You hear it twice, and then there is the balcony reflection, a right reserved for the precocious. At sunset, you are led to a narrow balcony overlooking the south garden. You are handed a book of your past weekly behaviors, written in third-person passive voice. The subject declined the second invitation to gratitude. The subject smiled in the shadow of jest. The subject adjusted their collar before command. You're asked to read each line aloud, with sincerity, without irony, without flinching. You do. Your voice does not shake. At the end, the steward says only, You are beginning to understand weight. From this moment on, you are trusted with gesture trials. These are theatrical punishments, posed as performances. You must deliver a 5-minute speech on the dangers of unsanctioned rhythm, all while maintaining a fixed smile and balancing a sugar spoon on your chin. You must perform a scene of incorrect apology with another child, one who bows too low and must be corrected through interpretive stillness. You once portray the spirit of unchecked curiosity, and your costume is a robe stitched with hundreds of watchful eyes. The embroidery itches terribly. You become adept at watching others break down, softly, politely, but unmistakably. Unboy, Don Mateo, loses his ability to blink only once per sentence. He begins blinking twice. By the end of the week, he is whispering apologies between sips of soup. A girl named Constanza walks backwards out of a room and is punished for reverse initiative. She is assigned the spiral walk, where she must walk in ever-tightening circles until she finds her center. You time her revolutions. 39. And yet, amid the elaborate theater of it all, you begin to notice the absurdity. You notice that the cardinal frowns when candles are too symmetrical, that the seamstress makes deliberate mistakes to avoid suspicion of perfection, that one steward hums funeral songs at half-tempo just to mock the pacing. You realize everyone is acting, and so you act too. But now you do so with intent. You place your fork just a millimeter askew. You blink one beat off rhythm. You let the sleeve of your robe dip slightly over your hand. Tiny rebellions, unnoticeable to the blind, obvious to the wise. And though no one speaks of it, you feel it. A current beneath the polished floor, a whisper under every rote correction. Some of you are learning to perform within the performance, to punish with elegance, to misbehave beautifully. You, now 13, are no longer simply surviving the court. You are becoming part of its shadow. At 14, you're old enough to be initiated into the most cryptic of court rituals, the ceremony of reversible faults. It's never announced. It arrives in silence. One day you find a folded parchment beneath your cushion at Vespers, sealed with violet wax, and bearing a single phrase, "What is mistake in the light is virtue in the dark." You don't know whether to be afraid or flattered. You are both. The ceremony takes place in a room you didn't know existed. A narrow, windowless chamber behind the gallery of misremembered portraits. You're blindfolded for the final passage and made to kneel on a square of salt-dusted velvet. The steward, who smells faintly of cloves and ink, whispers the instructions. You will now perform 3 errors, each in its proper form. One must be too loud, one too small, one too early. Each is sacred. You spill a drop of ink on your sleeve. You bow too deeply to a potted plant. You laugh once, just once, before a story is finished. And when it is done, no one scolds you. Instead, the steward places a tiny glass bell in your palm and says, "Now you know." You aren't told what it means. You are expected to figure that out on your own over the course of the next several years. After this, you are permitted access to the Library of Partial Truths, a wing of the archives where the texts contradict themselves on purpose. One scroll claims Queen Mariana wept when her slippers were misplaced. Another insists she made the chambermaid wear them for a week as punishment. You are not to resolve the contradictions. You are to hold them side by side in your thoughts. The point, it seems, is not knowledge. The point is weight. At meals, you are allowed to sit at the edge of the lesser table, a place reserved for those in transitional reflection. You're not quite a child, not yet an adult. The seats are narrower. The spoons are deliberately bent. The bread is served unevenly, one day fresh, one day dry. It is designed to teach you how to handle irregularity with grace. You now participate in corrective theater, not as actor or observer, but as playwright. Your assignment: script a scenario in which joy must be tempered, and then act it out with 3 others. You write a piece titled The Too Delighted Pilgrim, in which a girl receives a letter from a friend, smiles with excessive exuberance, and must then convince the court that the letter was merely about a dead pet and not a joyous reunion. The other children applaud silently. As trained, the steward makes a single mark in his book, a tiny sun half covered by a cloud. You don't know if that's good or bad. You're told it doesn't matter. You become responsible for younger pages. You correct their posture, guide their phrasing, and ensure their sighs fall within the acceptable auditory range. One child, perhaps 9, keeps wrinkling her nose during prayer. You're told to help her reframe displeasure. You invent a game where she must describe each scent in the chapel as a color. She decides frankincense is blue. You smile too much at this. You are not corrected. Now you are entrusted with counter-punishment, the court's most delicate social calibration. It involves delivering small gestures of comfort to those recently punished, only when the moment is correct, and only if the gesture does not undo the moral purpose. A handkerchief left folded precisely on a bench. A plum set on the sill near the one who fasted. A glance that lingers just long enough to say, "You survived this too." These acts are not sanctioned. They are tolerated. You begin to receive them as well. A scroll of your own handwriting returned with a note. Your restraint is eloquent. A pair of gloves mended invisibly at the seam. A candle moved closer on a drafty morning. You begin to suspect that those at the highest levels of the court, those with stiff collars and empty eyes, are not the ones in control. Power, you realize, is not always loud. Sometimes it's the one who notices. Sometimes it's the one who chooses when not to correct. By now, your name is known in the ledger, not as transgressor or exemplar, but as interpreter. You're called to help resolve uncertain deviations, those rare acts for which the punishment is unclear. Like the boy who wrote his name with too much flourish on a condolence note, or the girl who finished a bow with a flourish that was beautiful. You are asked, was this a breach? You are expected to answer in metaphor. You say, it was like a leaf turning over in wind. Not rebellion, just reaction. The panel accepts this. The girl is told to read poetry aloud in the garden for 3 mornings to balance her internal rhythm. You accompany her on the 2nd day. She stumbles over a line. You pretend not to notice. She smiles. You've stopped carrying the emotion tokens, not because you've outgrown them, but because the steward handed you a pouch one day and said, "You no longer need reminders." You still have the pouch, though. You keep a beetle shell inside from the courtyard garden. It glints green in the dark. Somewhere during this year, a young noble visits from a foreign court. Brash, loud, utterly unaware of protocol. You're assigned to shadow her for 3 days. She claps at meals. She gasps during Mass. She tells a joke so loudly in the corridor that even the tapestries seem to recoil. And yet nothing happens. She is not corrected. You ask the steward about this. He only smiles and says, "She is not ours." This unsettles you more than any punishment ever has. You realize, painfully, that your correction is a kind of belonging. You are not free, but you are theirs. And strangely, this comforts you. You know how to survive here. You know the music of restraint. You know the pleasure of a well-delivered rebuke, the satisfaction of perfectly folded remorse. And deep down, beneath the polish and posture, beneath the lessons and ledger entries, you hold on to that first crooked fork, that forbidden smile, that robe of watching eyes. You carry them like prayers, like teeth tucked beneath the tongue, like seeds you will never plant, but always hold. 15 finds you stretch taller than the door frames and quieter than ever. Your voice now a steady thing that moves only when summoned. Your movements slow and thoughtful, like a statue pretending to breathe. You are now eligible for the order of measured gait. A subtle distinction given only to those who can walk a full corridor without creating audible rhythm, without attracting the gaze of even the most suspicious steward. You are not told that you've been inducted. You simply wake one morning to find a slipper, one, not two, dyed ash gray and placed on the foot of your bed. That is the sign. That is enough. From now on, the punishments shift. No more chairs of recalibration or silent choirs. No. Now you face misdirection correction, a method so delicate it feels like art. The trick lies in steering you away from error without naming it, without even acknowledging that it ever existed. You might find your usual scroll quill replaced with one slightly blunter, your assigned seat 1 degree off from its normal angle, your reflection in the prayer basin obscured by a strategically placed flower. These are cues. You must decode them before they bloom into full rebuke. This is the year you are invited to witness a punishment rehearsal. A rare behind-the-scenes look at how elaborate reprimands are tested before public display. A steward steps into the role of a careless duke. Another plays a cook who sang too brightly while stirring broth. They walk through the motions of what will become the official ceremony. The script, the props, the ceremonial sighs. You realize for the first time that punishments are themselves performances. Rehearsed, calibrated, designed to affect not just the offender, but the onlookers. You begin to wonder how many of your own had a dress rehearsal. You're also shown the book of unused penalties, a leather-bound tome kept behind a curtain in the archive's lowest drawer. Each page holds a punishment too absurd, too poetic, or too emotionally risky to be used in public. You skim titles like The Bell of Hesitation, The Hour of Clashing Socks, and Reprimand by Inverted Praise. One entry reads, "Subject, must compose a song in praise of their own humility, then destroy it in silence. Another, a full day spent addressing objects by name as apology for years of silent use. You cannot stop reading. Meanwhile, your personal schedule grows tighter. You now tutor younger initiates in the art of composed disagreement, how to express protest without sound, how to tilt a neck just enough to suggest dissent while maintaining allegiance. One child invents a posture that seems to smile and frown at once. You document it. It will likely become regulation. At night, your dreams become more vivid. You see parades of forks walking on their own. You dream of scrolls that rewrite themselves as you read them. Once you wake laughing, really laughing for the first time in months. You muffle it into your pillow, then spend the next morning walking with a stone in your shoe. Unassigned, self-inflicted. You now participate in retroactive penitence, the act of revisiting old errors and reinterpreting them through current maturity. You're handed a record of your past infractions and asked to explain what each one meant. You reach the entry about your over-enthusiastic nod from age 10. You say, "It was not joy. It was agreement unmodulated." The steward nods. You are given a warm glass of vinegar and dismissed. You're introduced to the gallery of intentions, a dim, echoing corridor where painted symbols represent emotional motivations that were never voiced. A golden spiral for silent yearning, a silver loop for pride disguised as modesty, a blue triangle with a missing corner for love, misplaced. You are asked to walk the gallery alone, select the image that best represents you, and sit before it for an hour. You choose the iron circle with a thread trailing off one side. You are not asked to explain. Your taste evolves. You begin to crave errors, not to commit, but to observe. The girl who forgets to remove her gloves before prayer. The boy who sings one note too true. You begin to collect them, not for correction, but for admiration. You see them like brushstrokes in a painting, irregular, vital, necessary. You begin writing your own entries in an invisible book. You call it the Ledger of Almost. It includes moments like the time you nearly spoke before the steward finished his sentence, the afternoon your spoon reflected sunlight into the cardinal's eye, and he blinked, the breath you took that almost turned into a sigh, and of course, the memory of a girl from the East Wing, whose laughter once sounded exactly like forgiveness. You're assigned to assist in a public humility demonstration, a carefully orchestrated display where an older courtier reenacts his greatest flaw before an audience. This month, it's Lord Beltran, who once used the wrong salutation in a condolence letter. He now kneels on a bed of empty envelopes, reciting phrases of apology in descending order of sincerity. Your job is to ring a bell every time he uses the passive voice. You do. 7 times. When it's over, he thanks you. You begin noticing that the oldest courtiers, those with shaking hands and silent steps, carry no punishment marks, no pins, no scrolls, no badges. They have moved beyond correction. They have become the idea of obedience. You are told this is the goal. You are not so sure, because deep down, you still think about the color room. Only now it appears differently in your imagination. It is no longer bright and loud. It is dim, like twilight. The colors are muted, not garish. There is no jester dancing. There is a single chair, a candle, a loaf of bread shaped like nothing in particular. But there is no ledger, and you are not being watched. This, you think, must be the purest form of rebellion. Not chaos, but peace. Not noise, but quiet that belongs only to you. You turn 15 in a room filled with silence. A girl gives you a ribbon folded into the shape of an ear. She says, to listen to yourself. She does not smile. You do not thank her. You tuck it inside your sleeve. That night, you walk the gallery again. You pause before the iron circle with the trailing thread. And for the first time, you see a second thread. Not yours, someone else's. You almost speak. Almost. Your 16th birthday arrives on a morning that smells faintly of candle wax and damp wool, with rain slipping in hesitant diagonal streaks across the high, stained glass windows. There is no celebration. Of course not. You're well past the age of fanfare. Instead, you receive a freshly folded note placed under your chamber door, written in a slanted, silvery hand. You are now eligible for internal contrition rites. The words are simple. The implications are vast. You already suspected it was coming. The signs have been gathering for weeks. Your tasks had become quieter, more abstract. You were asked to sort identical scrolls by emotional undertone. You were sent to observe pigeons at the outer chapel and report which one looked most repentant. You were given dry bread for 7 consecutive lunches, without explanation. Now it begins. Internal contrition is not about punishment. Not really. It's about recreating your own sense of fault, manufacturing guilt from silence, sculpting unease from your own reflection. It starts with the room of gentle regret, a small hexagonal chamber lit only by a single window far above, out of reach. In the center, a low stool, a bowl of cold broth, and a pile of linen scraps. You are asked to write an apology, not for anything you've done, but for what you could have done. You choose to apologize for the moment, years ago, when you almost whispered during a lull in the Mass. It was just a flicker, a desire to share a thought with the girl beside you. You didn't speak. But now you're meant to imagine the consequences as though you had. Your apology must be thorough, specific, and poetic. You begin. I'm sorry for the wind that never moved, for the echo that remained unborn, for the glance that nearly turned into speech. When finished, you are not praised. The steward merely nods and hands you a feather, not from a quill, but from a dove. You are told to carry it until it disintegrates naturally. If you lose it, the rite resets. Later that week, you attend your first spectacle of subverted grace. These are punishments so elaborate, so exquisite. They circle back around into beauty. This one involves a courtier who once moved too swiftly during a blessing procession. Now he must glide across the hall of tapestries on a platform pulled by 2 blindfolded pages. Each movement is accompanied by a single note from a glass harmonica. It takes 25 minutes for him to travel 10 meters. Everyone watches in perfect silence. Somewhere deep inside you, you feel something shift. Not disdain, not even amusement, admiration. That level of control, of theatrical precision, it is its own kind of power. You begin to suspect that the most punished are often the most powerful. You are soon invited to serve as an error choreographer. Your task? Design the physical gesture for someone else's punishment. You're handed a brief, a woman who spoke too early in the circle of listening. You choose 3 steps backward while holding a silver spoon between the teeth, followed by a pause and a downward gaze. The steward approves. It feels strange to design someone else's humiliation, but it also feels creative. You become adept at translating faults into gestures. A too bold opinion becomes a curtsy interrupted halfway down. A misplaced compliment becomes a whistle held in the throat, but never released. You design 42 punishments in your first season. 17 are used. 1 becomes tradition. In quiet moments, you visit the basin of repetition, a shallow stone bowl filled with rainwater. Beneath the surface, etched into the bottom, are the 10 most repeated errors in the court's history. You read them aloud, always in reverse order. It's said that doing so helps prevent repetition. Though no one truly believes this, the list is comforting. You begin to notice how many of your peers have perfected the art of ceremonial dishevelment. Just the right amount of untucked sleeve, the hairpin placed slightly off. These are not mistakes. These are curated imperfections, designed to elicit soft correction and thereby demonstrate humility. It's a game of inverse vanity. You play it once, the steward says nothing. You are disappointed. To balance this, you delve into private punishment rituals, those self-imposed disciplines meant to sharpen one's sense of duty. You choose to wear mismatched socks under your robe for a week. No one can see them, but you know. And that is enough. You now assist in the training of younger stewards, those still learning how to read the gestures of guilt. You teach them about deflected gaze, inward shouldering, and thumb tremor. You remind them, guilt does not always want to be found. Sometimes it begs for disguise. One day, you're asked to interpret the tears of a child who spilled water during scripture copying. You reply, "Those are not tears of sorrow. They are tears of rhythm interrupted." The steward writes this down. You now have a quote in the court's book of aphorisms. It is printed beneath your name, followed by a small emblem of a falling droplet. You are permitted to choose your own quiet day. 1 calendar day per month, when you're not required to speak, perform, or be corrected. You choose the 2nd Tuesday. You spend it writing imaginary infractions in your secret ledger. Spoke too kindly to a stone. Listened too well. Believed herself innocent. You know none of these will be discovered. But writing them feels like tending to a garden of invisible weeds. Late one evening, a figure you've never met visits your chamber. She wears the badge of the inner court, the final circle. She places a folded paper on your pillow. It is blank, utterly blank. You are told this is a permission of interpretation. You may now assign your own punishments, to yourself or to no one. You are not expected to report them. This is considered the highest level of trust. You nod. When she leaves, you place the blank paper inside your sleeve, next to the ribbon shaped like an ear, and the beetle shell, and the faded emotion tokens you never quite discarded. You are 16. You are silent, and every silence has a name. 17 arrives like a breath you hadn't realized you were holding, a season not marked by ceremony or gift, but by subtraction. Things begin to disappear. The steward who once corrected your posture no longer watches as you pass. The bell that marked midday reflection chimes more softly, as though questioning its own relevance. You are not told that you've graduated to the rank of inward arbiter. You simply begin waking earlier, instinctively, before the bells. You correct yourself now. That is the sign. With this transition comes your first assignment in silhouette supervision, a curious role that exists between observation and influence. You are to follow a courtier, not speak, not engage, only follow, and note where their shadows fall. This is literal. You trace how their figure moves in light, which corners they dim, which beams of sun their presence blocks. It is believed that the direction of one's shadow reveals the trajectory of their faults. You shadow a man named Don Rafael for 3 days. On the third, you notice his silhouette always bends left before he turns right. You record this. It is interpreted as a sign of anticipated hesitation, a pre-fault of the mouth. Days later, he is reassigned to quiet duties. Your words did that. This realization lingers. Around this time, you are introduced to echo correction. It is not your own echo, but that of another. You are given a phrase someone once whispered in a corridor, "I miss the mountains," and asked to restore balance by repeating it to a different person, in a different tone, under a different sky. The act must be untraceable. It is meant to dissipate emotional residue. You whisper it to a seamstress, mending cuffs. Her hand pauses, just briefly. That is enough. One evening, you are called to the hall of deferred reprimands, a long room lined with tapestries, stitched in patterns that seem to shift if you look too long. Each pattern represents a punishment not yet administered, wrongs recognized but postponed, stored like winter coats. You are shown 3 and asked to choose one to activate. You pick the one with the descending spiral. A courtier who has overcomplimented others to mask self-loathing. The chosen is asked to spend a week in the chamber of honest mirrors, where every surface slightly warps the reflection based on emotional posture. They emerge with a new gait, slower, steadier, and oddly kind. You begin to understand that punishment is often not about correction. It's about alignment. Balance. You study the theory of moral asymmetry, the belief that every visible error is mirrored by an invisible virtue. A girl who laughs too brightly might harbor deep humility. A boy who folds letters imperfectly might do so to avoid the sin of perfection. These are not excuses, they are calibrations. You write your first treatise, The Weight of the Almost Fault. It circulates quietly. 3 stewards quote it within a month. You are invited to the silent convocation, a gathering of 6 arbiters where no one speaks. All communication is through glance, breath, and placement of objects on a sand-dusted table. You're given a single stone and told to move it when you feel an error enter the room. You move it once. Another arbiter mirrors the motion. You are never told who committed the error. You are never told what it was. You feel cleansed anyway. And now, for the first time in years, you begin to revisit your memories without shame. You recall the crooked fork, the color room, the laughter you almost let escape. You begin to realize these were not failings. They were fragments of self. Untamed, yes, but vital. You begin collecting new objects, a ribbon stained with soup, a glove with 3 fingertips worn smooth, a spoon with a crack you do not repair. Each one represents a moment of uncorrected being. You call them your archive of intact errors. You do not show them to anyone, except once, to a girl you once punished with too much elegance. She nods when she sees them. Then she shows you her own, a tear-soaked bookmark, a pebble dropped during prayer, a smile drawn in chalk on the underside of a windowsill. You sit in silence, not as punishment, as communion. There is talk now of your final advancement, the circle of cloaked absence, those who no longer walk the corridors, but shape them. No one knows how or when the induction occurs. You begin to look for signs, a chair turned ever so slightly, a candle wick trimmed too short, a question never asked aloud. One morning, your robe is replaced with one that has no crest, no trim, no color. Just linen. You wear it. You're 17. You carry no ledger now. No one records your movements. No one corrects your stance. You're a ghost with weight, a silence with presence, a punishment no longer visible, but still felt. And yet, you smile. Not broadly, not with joy, but with equilibrium. Because now you understand what the court truly is. It is not a place of justice or cruelty. It is a place of shapes. And you? You are the curve inside the rule. At 18, you awaken with the strange, almost humorous awareness that your bones creak in places they didn't the year before. Not from age, of course, not truly, but from carrying a weight that has long since stopped being purely symbolic. You're a fixture now, not only within the corridors, but within the court's psyche. When you pass, conversations pause, not in fear, but in calibration. People look to you not for correction, but confirmation that their errors are within permitted bounds. You are, in a way, the court's invisible ruler, measuring, steady, silent. This is the year of ceremonial decay, an annual rite in which one highly regarded individual is chosen to embody the fragility of perfection. You are selected. Of course you are. You're wrapped in once fine silks, now deliberately stained, and your hair is powdered unevenly. You walk barefoot across the grand stair, flanked by 2 novices who chant all your recorded errors in reverse order, like peeling away the layers of a particularly disciplined onion. By the end of the hour, you are not embarrassed. You are elevated. For the court, to admit decay is to master it. You are congratulated not with applause, but with silence that stretches a full minute longer than usual. Your silence, in return, is complete. The next day, you're gifted the hourglass of intervals, an object so delicate, it's kept inside 3 nested boxes. It marks not time, but timing. The grains fall irregularly, their speed subtly shifting based on ambient tension in the room. You're to consult it before deciding when to offer forgiveness, when to interrupt, when to leave. You carry it inside your sleeve for a week, then you stop. You no longer need it. You've begun to feel intervals like pulse. There is a new responsibility now, emotion induction. You are to orchestrate the emotional tone of shared spaces, not through speech, but through environment. You adjust chair angles. You place fruit in odd numbers. You open windows just enough to invite a breeze that whispers of uncertainty. You do this not to unsettle, but to invite awareness. You become the steward of atmosphere. No one thanks you. You wouldn't want them to. You find yourself summoned more often to resolve cases of incongruent remorse, moments when someone's apology does not match their expression, when their repentance fails to convince. Your job is not to judge sincerity, but to balance the performance. A young scribe weeps too heavily for a minor fault. You reduce the punishment. A seasoned duchess offers a dry, efficient apology for a grave insult. You assign 3 days of barefoot reflection in the hall of unread books. She accepts without protest. By now, you can identify 7 categories of apology. You invent names for them: the melodic echo, the feathered collapse, the inverted boast, the stone without shadow, the rehearsed tremble, the hollow gift, the true silence. You only see the last one once. A boy stands before the tribunal, accused of interrupting a sacred reading with laughter. He says nothing, absolutely nothing. No expression, no breath, just stillness. It unnerves the entire room. You call it true silence. He is excused without punishment. Later, you see him in the chapel, weeping. You do not speak to him. You simply stand close enough that he knows he was seen. You now attend correction dinners, elaborate meals, where each course symbolizes a fault. Oversalted soup for speaking without knowledge. Bread that crumbles for unreliable promises. A dessert too sweet for flattery. The guests must narrate their sins in the form of tasting notes. You once say, "The bitterness reminds me of when I knew too much and said it anyway." Someone claps. They are gently corrected. There is a hallway you pass daily, one with no windows, just a series of paintings that grow less complete the farther you walk. The last frame holds only a single brushstroke. One day, you stop. You place your hand on the frame. It's warm. You think of all the times you were almost punished and weren't. You think of the times you punished and wished you hadn't. You wonder if, at the very edge of this structure, something waits. Not chaos, not freedom, but something unmeasured, something unbalanced on purpose. This year, you take on a protégée, a girl of 12, slight, intense, prone to moving her lips while thinking. She reminds you of yourself, but less afraid. You watch her navigate her first public correction, an over-eager curtsy that knocks over a scroll stand. She apologizes and adds, "I meant it." No one expects the second sentence. You smile, you begin to write her lessons. Not the official ones, your own. You call them rules, for when you've forgotten the rules. Rule 1. When in doubt, breathe once more than needed. Rule 2. If your error is beautiful, preserve it. Rule 3. Silence is not always the most obedient response. Rule 4. If a punishment feels like freedom, accept it. You never give her these rules all at once. You fold them into the corners of books, tuck them inside gloves, hide them under candlesticks. You suspect she finds them because her eyes begin to hold the same half-smile you once wore. The same knowing not of answers, but of timing. You're 18. You're shaping shadows, and your own is finally doing what no punishment ever did. It is beginning to leave a mark. 19 brings with it the kind of clarity that doesn't arrive all at once, like a sudden burst of sunlight through a dusty corridor, but rather seeps into you over time, like warm air finding its way into a cold room. You no longer flinch when a steward appears unannounced. You no longer count the seconds between a transgression and its consequence. You no longer wait for approval. You calibrate yourself, and in doing so, you have become the standard by which others are measured. Your name begins to circulate in whispers, not as rumor, not as scandal, but as reference. Check with her, they say, when punishment proposals feel too crude. She'll know, they murmur, when emotional signals conflict. You're no longer a learner. You're a custodian of nuance, of severity, of mercy, carefully rationed. This is the year you receive an invitation. No sender, no seal, just a square of folded parchment left beneath your plate during the noon of measured intentions. It reads only, "Join us in the Gallery of the Unmade." You know the place. You've walked past it 100 times, a hallway with no entry, a blank wall. But tonight, the bricks shift. A narrow door opens. You enter. Inside, the gallery is not a room, but a tunnel. Long, narrow, quiet, except for the sound of fabric brushing against thought. The walls are covered in empty frames. Each one is labeled not with images, but with absences. The apology, never given. The mistake no one noticed. The kindness withheld. You walk slowly, aware that each frame is, in some delicate way, your own. Not your errors, but your hesitations. You are told, by a figure cloaked in dust-colored linen, that you may choose one absence to undo. Just one. You hesitate. You think of the fork, the beetle, the girl with the ear-shaped ribbon. Then you touch the frame labeled "The Smile Suppressed." A memory returns, age 13. The moment you resisted laughing at a steward's joke. Not because it was forbidden, but because you thought it made you look weak. You are given 1 hour to smile in solitude. It is harder than expected. But you do it. And when the hour ends, you leave with lighter steps. Your next weeks are spent designing contrapuntal reforms, punishments that contradict themselves in structure. You assign a duke to sing a silent song, a novice is ordered to misfold napkins with perfect symmetry. A duchess must write a flawless essay on the virtues of flaw. These punishments are not cruel. They are exercises in paradox, meant to stretch the soul beyond simple binaries of wrong and right. People begin to call your approach the method of gentle reversal. It is studied, it is feared. You attend the night of intentions, a midnight assembly lit only by the glow of remorse candles, wicks soaked in the wax of melted confessions. Each attendee places a small object on the floor, something that represents their most invisible regret. You place a fragment of wax from a candle you never lit. No one asks what it means. That's the point. Soon the court assigns you to a new post. Error architect. You are now responsible for identifying emerging patterns in the infractions of the court. Trends, repetitions, generational quirks. You discover that younger initiates tend to commit errors of overclarity, saying too precisely what should remain suggestive. You propose a corrective ritual called the murmured circle, where they must narrate a memory with 3 words deliberately removed. It works, imperfectly, but that is the point. You start charting the curve of correction, a theoretical model tracking how the emotional weight of a punishment decays over time. You realize that many of the court's most enduring reprimands are not those that cause pain, but those that caused pause. Stillness, it seems, leaves a deeper mark than sting. By now, the older arbiters greet you not with words, but with shared gestures. An upturned palm, a bowed head, a glance held a fraction too long. These are not acknowledgments of status. They are acknowledgments of witness. You have seen what they've seen. You understand. One afternoon, during a storm that rattles the ivory shutters, you are asked to officiate a forgiveness ceremony. The subject is a former steward who once overpunished a child for laughing during sacrament. The steward kneels. The child, now grown, places a feather on his back. You are to recite the 3 phrases of conditional pardon. 1. You were not wrong, only early. 2. You caused harm, but it was not poison. 3. You may carry less now. You speak them slowly. The feather falls, the wind outside quiets, and you realize forgiveness, too, is a kind of punishment. The kind that demands you live with what you've been given. You begin writing a second treatise on the echo of correction. In it, you propose that no punishment ever truly ends. It only settles, like dust, on the surfaces of memory. It is your most ambitious work. Some say it reads like poetry. Some say it feels like confession. You do not clarify. You now mentor 3 apprentices. One bites her nails and denies it. One apologizes too early. One never blinks. You love them, quietly, as you were once loved. You are 19. You carry no punishment tokens. You issue no apologies. And yet, the weight of every infraction you've ever witnessed walks beside you. Not heavy, not light, just there. Balanced, waiting. At 20, the year begins not with a celebration, but with the quiet reassignment of your sleeping quarters. No announcement, no letter. You simply return from the hall of gentle censures to find your cot removed, your linens folded, and waiting outside a different chamber. One you've never entered, tucked between the records of unshed laughter and the vestibule of thoughtful delay. The new room is slightly colder. The walls curve inward. There is no candle, only a glow that seems to come from the floor itself, soft and indirect, like moonlight soaked into stone. There is no mirror. This is intentional. You are now part of the circle of weighted absence, a loosely defined grouping of those whose role is no longer outward. You do not correct. You do not assign. You do not instruct. Instead, you are present in rooms where nothing is said. And yet everything happens. You are often asked to sit beside an argument before it begins, or to walk past a gathering before it disbands. Your very presence has become a temperance mechanism. You are a walking pause. And like all pauses, you're sometimes misunderstood, but often appreciated, if only subconsciously. One morning, a new steward forgets your name. You do not correct him. You know the feeling, strangely liberating. You are now permitted entry to the vault of prolonged reflections, a chamber where punishments too complex for words are stored in objects, a fan with 2 broken spokes, a sandal carved from salt, a ring too small for any finger. These are not artifacts. They are active reprimands. To hold them is to feel the error they represent. You're allowed to choose one. You select the salt sandal. You carry it in a pouch for a week, and every time it rains, you feel it dissolve slightly. It is a punishment of impermanence, reminding you that some consequences fade even as they persist. You write a note about this. That which disappears leaves the sharpest outline. This phrase ends up etched into the inner wall of the contrition cloister. You didn't ask for that. But you also don't mind. Now you're asked to participate in reversal studies, sessions where you must defend an infraction, not condemn it. A boy who shouted during a vigil? You suggest he was echoing an ancestor's grief. A woman who stepped backward during procession? You argue that she was avoiding an invisible memory. These defenses are not accepted. That's not the point. The act of reversing the moral current is the exercise. You call it relensing. It catches on. You become the subject of quiet debate. Is she still part of the structure? They whisper. Or has she become the echo of it? You're not sure either. This is also the year you begin dreaming of things outside the court. Not rebellions, not escapes. Simpler things. A field, a boat, a letter without destination. You don't act on them, but you write them down under the title Non-Punitive Imaginations. These pages are never filed. You keep them under your mattress. One day, you're summoned to the hall of awaited missteps, a place not often visited, reserved for those who are about to err. It is filled with anticipation, not judgment. The people here have not failed yet. They are merely close. Your role is not to intervene, but to witness pre-failure. To be a soft pressure that reminds them they still have a choice. You sit beside a woman who is about to speak too boldly in a letter. You gently turn her ink bottle upside down. She waits, and the moment passes. She thanks you with a glance. Nothing more. You smile. And later that evening, you burn one of your non-punitive pages. It feels fair. You begin to re-examine old punishments you designed in your youth. Some feel harsh now, some incomplete, some beautiful. You decide not to revise them. Instead, you write an addendum. Addendums are the softest apologies. You share this with your former protégé, now 14, who has started designing corrections of her own. She gives you a new token, a folded napkin with the words, "Not yet," stitched in thread. It is meant for errors that have not occurred, but are waiting nearby. You carry it everywhere, and one morning, when you nearly speak too soon to a steward, almost interrupt a silence that wasn't finished, you feel the napkin in your sleeve. You don't speak. And just like that, the token has served its purpose. You are invited to draft your own ceremony of subtle departure. A rite reserved for those who may one day leave the court, not through exile or death, but through soft removal. The ceremony is never performed, but writing it is the first step toward erasure. You draft only the first line. She began to become lighter than the furniture. And then you stop, because you are not ready to leave, not yet. Instead, you begin designing invisible punishments, reprimands that are never announced, never acted upon, only imagined. You assign one to yourself. Every time you remember the beetle shell you once crushed in anger, you must think of something fragile that you preserved. It becomes a balancing ritual. Soon, others begin to request invisible punishments. You guide them through the process. Your ledger, once so full of detailed documentation, now contains only single words. Sometimes just ellipses, sometimes nothing. You are 20. You're not tired. You're not finished, but you're quieter than you've ever been. And in that quiet, the court breathes a little easier. Not because of your silence, but because of how completely you filled it. You are 21 when they give you the mask. They do not tell you when it will arrive or who will deliver it. That would be too loud, too clear. Instead, one evening, as you return from a session in the corridor of hesitations, where courtiers are asked to relive moments they almost chose wrong, you find it placed on your cot. No note, no ceremony, just the mask of the contrite, resting atop your folded blanket like it had always belonged to you and had only now remembered to come home. The mask is iron, not heavy, but cold in a way that never truly warms. It's molded into a fixed expression of profound, almost theatrical apology. Eyebrows curved upward in eternal concern, lips parted slightly in soft, permanent regret. You're not expected to wear it all the time. Only when words would be an overcorrection. Only when presence must say what sound cannot. You put it on for the first time during the vigil of missed corrections, a quiet gathering of arbiters and stewards who meet to read from the scroll of Almos, a record of faults, noted but never punished, transgressions seen but allowed to pass for reasons unknown. You sit silently in the corner, masked, unmoving, as they recite stories of men who whispered too loud during confession, of women who folded prayers into the wrong pocket. Your mask says what they dare not. Yes, you were wrong. And yes, we chose to let you be. In this way, the mask does not punish. It forgives with weight. You begin designing mirror sessions where courtiers are asked to stand before a reflection, not of their face, but of a version of themselves rendered in objects they've touched most often. A cracked teacup, a worn slipper, a note written and torn in half. You guide them through the viewing in silence, masked, holding their gaze without eyes. Some weep, others laugh. No one walks away unchanged. There is one man, a retired etiquette instructor, who cannot look. You allow him to speak instead. He confesses that his greatest error was too much rigidity, that he taught obedience without grace. You remove the mask briefly. Only then does he meet your eyes. You do not nod. You do not smile. But your stillness says, it mattered that you said it. The next day, you are summoned to the archive of redacted sins, a vault where the court stores the names of those who are punished for crimes they did not commit. Deliberately, as a way of absorbing blame that was unplaceable. It is the court's darkest secret, one known only to the masked. You read the scrolls in silence, some names you recognize. One, long ago, was your friend. You remember the beetle shell again. You place the napkin of "not yet" beside the scroll and whisper, maybe never. No one hears, but the parchment curls slightly at the corner, as if acknowledging your offering. That night, you dream of a room filled with masks, some smiling, some weeping, some yawning from centuries of fatigue. You wake with the understanding that the mask is not you. It is merely a garment for moments when your face is too honest, too soft, too full of light to be allowed. You wear it less often now. Instead, you design rituals of partial remorse, small gestures for small wrongs, a cough followed by a bow, a misplaced spoon turned gently clockwise, a 3-second pause before laughter. These rituals are practiced in secret and eventually adopted in plain sight. Soon the entire court performs them unconsciously. You smile. You're invited to contribute to the lexicon of punitive silence, a growing dictionary of unspoken corrections. You suggest a new entry: stilled pulse, the act of choosing not to speak when one's opinion would harm more than it heals. It becomes a favorite. You begin noticing it everywhere. Your apprentices, now older, wiser, begin designing punishments of their own. You allow them to assign one to you. They choose the reflection of accumulated kindness. For 1 week, you must find 3 things each day that someone has done well but was not praised for. You must name them aloud. This is harder than you expect. Praise, it turns out, requires a different strength than correction. On the 5th day, you stop an elderly steward in the corridor and tell him that the way he carries silence is beautiful. He weeps. You do too. You write that down. In the book of mutual fragility, another project you never meant to start. But that grew like ivy, slow, uninvited, and tender. At 21, the mask is no longer iron. It is no longer even visible. You wear it in your walk, in your restraint, in the way you place a book back on a shelf with 2 fingers instead of 5. You begin to suspect that true punishment is never imposed. It is only ever accepted, and forgiveness. It is the permission to stop carrying what you no longer need. You go to sleep that night with your hands open. For once, nothing falls out. You are 22 when the punishments become performances, not in the theatrical sense of velvet curtains and exaggerated gestures. No, those are far too garish for the Spanish Habsburg court. Here, performance is a matter of tone, of glance, of knowing precisely how long to hold a candle before passing it to someone who wronged you. There are stages, yes, but they are made of polished silence and velvet deference. And you? You are drafted, gently, inevitably, into the royal moral theatre. This is not a place, but a function. You and a carefully selected handful of arbiters are tasked with reenacting fault, penance, and restoration in structured vignettes before an audience of half-listening nobles sipping cordial. The court has decided that punishment alone is insufficient. Now it must instruct by display. It must teach by mimicry. Your first scene is titled "The Spoon That Turned Too Early." You play a kitchen maid who interrupts a toast with a clatter of enthusiasm. Your correction is to balance a single pear on your head while listening to a sermon on restraint. The audience chuckles politely. One baron whispers, "Exquisite balance." You hear it and suppress a smile. The mask is not on your face, but it's there, nonetheless. The next day, you propose a revision, the unspoken apology. In this scene, 2 figures pass each other repeatedly, each trying to offer forgiveness without words. Their gestures growing increasingly elaborate, offering handkerchiefs, glancing at the same window, adjusting each other's collars. The scene ends not with resolution, but with the faint sound of shared breath. It receives a standing silence. That is the highest praise. As weeks pass, you become not just a performer, but a choreographer of contrition. You begin designing entire evenings of emotive correction. Short rituals where the nobles act out misdeeds they have not committed, not because they are guilty, but because they might be. You call this preventative penance. One duchess chooses to mime hiding a letter. Another pretends to trip a rival. The gestures are quiet, the implications loud. You're asked to compose the dance of redundant apologies, a slow, looping movement performed in concentric circles, where each step is a repeated version of a previous regret. The music is played on instruments slightly out of tune, so the dancers must adjust their pace mid-performance. It's frustrating. It's beautiful. It ends with no applause, only a single bell chime from the gallery above. The court is changing, and with it, your role. You are less judge, more conductor, less enforcer, more curator of mood. You light incense before sentencing. You request that all shoes be removed before certain dialogues. You have a theory that punishment absorbed through art lingers longer than that imposed through fear. You test this theory by hosting the silent gallery of overcorrection, a series of living tableaux where courtiers sit absolutely still, embodying the emotional aftermath of having apologized too much. One woman portrays worn knees, another thin throat. A young man, trembling slightly, plays excessive regret with no witness. Viewers walk by, quietly placing tokens, pear seeds, lace scraps, buttons, before the performers. Some weep, not the performers, the viewers. Afterward, the tokens are collected and sewn into a large tapestry called What We Thought You Needed. It hangs near the chapel of gentle restraint, fluttering slightly even when there is no wind. You write in your private ledger, correction need not strike. It can hover. You are asked to design your own scene for the night of enduring faults, an annual gathering in which the arbiters reenact their own most formative misdeed. You choose not the beetle, not the girl. You choose a moment almost forgotten. The time you corrected a friend in public for something they hadn't meant. A slip of tone, not intent. Your performance is titled The Tilted Voice. You simply sit, alone, adjusting a spoon repeatedly to face the wrong way. The room watches in silence, and when it ends, no one moves. You realize in that moment that the deepest punishment is not the blow, but the knowing, the long echo of, I should have waited. You are no longer addressed by name in the performance ledger. You are now referred to only as the quiet curator. You neither accept nor reject the title. It simply fits. The theater becomes your garden. You walk its invisible paths with calm certainty, tending to the emotions of others, like moss growing between stones. When a noble stumbles through a scene, you adjust the lighting. When a steward's expression trembles too soon, you cough gently. These are your cues. This is your stage. You begin training the next generation, not in words, but in glances. You meet their eyes and nod. They understand. Correction now moves in waves, soft, invisible, irresistible. At 22, you choreograph your final performance for the year. When the correction corrects the corrector, it is a duet. You perform with your first apprentice. She plays the younger version of you. Rigid, precise, certain. You play her mirror, slow and questioning. Together you move through mirrored mistakes, echoed gestures, shared pauses. The final movement is a bow that never quite lands. hovering, suspended. The audience forgets to breathe. And you? You finally let the mask go. It is placed beside the stage, no longer needed. It has already imprinted itself where it matters most. Not on your face, but on the spaces you leave behind. By the time you're 23, silence has become not just your language, but your signature. You no longer speak to correct, nor even to instruct. Instead, you have mastered the art of subtextual correction, a discipline where meaning passes not through words, but through arrangement, context, and omission. The court has grown to depend on your presence the way a room depends on its walls, unnoticed, until someone leans against them. This is the year you're entrusted with the chamber of lingering offense, a room reserved not for crimes, but for feelings that outlasted their cause. Disappointments, unmet expectations, the vague ache of being misinterpreted. None of them punishable, yet all demanding response. The chamber is furnished with mismatched chairs, unlevel tables, and mirrors, angled to show everything but oneself. People sit in silence here, awaiting a resolution that never arrives in words. You enter only to rearrange. Move a cup, tilt a chair, adjust the temperature by half a degree. Then you leave. Some say their grief lightens afterward. You never ask. One morning, you're asked to moderate a conflict without origin. Two women, neither of whom remember what first drove them apart, request a structured form of reconciliation that does not rely on memory. You design a ritual called the return to before. For 3 hours, they are to inhabit roles they might have had if they had never quarreled. One becomes the other's laundress. The other braids her hair. No talking. Just parallel domesticity. They laugh once. That is enough. You record it in the book of conditional joy. You also begin studying the architecture of misalignment, an emerging theory in which misbehavior is attributed not to malice, but to structural misunderstanding. Wrong time, wrong space, wrong audience. You demonstrate this by having a duke deliver a flawless speech to an empty corridor. Then, in reverse, you have a servant recite a confused apology to a full gallery. Both performances are flawless. Both are failures. You document the results in your treatise on echo and error, where you posit that most wrongdoing is an accident of acoustics. This is the year you begin experimenting with corrective sense. Lavender for misused softness, myrrh for arrogance, masked as formality. Onion skin and cloves for dishonesty, cloaked in kindness. You wear them subtly during sessions, allowing participants to adjust their behavior based on a feeling they cannot name. Your most successful intervention occurs without a single spoken word. Just a flick of rosemary oil behind your ear and a well-timed sigh. No one admits it worked, but no further corrections are needed. You're now invited to the Evening of Recanted Judgments, a once-a-year event where high arbiters review their harshest decisions and decide quietly, with no announcement, whether they would have done things differently. You attend without a seat. You simply stand, masked once more, your presence a gentle prod toward reevaluation. Several judgments are softened that night. None are revoked. Softening is enough. You begin spending more time in the corridor of secondary regrets, a narrow hallway where individuals walk slowly past recordings of their own apologies. Some stumble, some listen. You adjust the sequence so that the loudest confessions are followed by the softest ones. the effect is disorienting. Perfect. You write a brief entry. Correction is not only what is said, it is what follows. You're asked to design the ceremony of intentions misplaced for those who meant well but failed in delivery. You choose a ritual involving shadow puppets. Each participant creates a symbol of their original intent, projected onto the wall by candlelight, then watches as it slowly distorts and fades. No one leaves until their shadow disappears entirely. One man stays for 7 hours. You bring him tea. He nods. That is enough. You train your final apprentice, someone nearly your mirror. She's quiet, but not withdrawn. Stern, but never cruel. You teach her to measure pauses by breath, to assign correction through temperature shifts. She catches on faster than you ever did. You feel something like pride. You name her interim whisper. You give her your beetle token. She does not ask what it means. That is exactly right. You write one final note in your ledger. At some point, the punishment becomes the pattern. After that, all you can do is soften the edges. You file it under softening. The court begins referring to you not by title nor by role, but by sensation. She was like the hush between mistakes, they say. Or the warmth you feel just before you realize what you've done. You spend more time in the garden now. You don't tend it. You simply walk through gently, once a day. The tulips seem to bloom when you do. At 23, you no longer assign punishment. You are the condition that makes punishment unnecessary. And in that you find something quieter than authority, something lighter than power, something nearly like peace. By 24, you no longer cast a shadow, not because the sun no longer shines on you, or because the candlelight in the hall of subdued grievances has grown dim, but because you have simply ceased to be the kind of presence that interrupts light. You glide, and the room remains unchanged, as though you were always part of it. And in many ways, you are. You receive a letter one morning, written in invisible ink, scented faintly with lavender and old parchment glue. You know it comes from the eldest arbiter, the one whose eyes always seemed fixed on a memory, not a person. The letter, when heated gently over steam, reveals just 4 words. It is time. Prepare. There is no fear in you. No dread. No sense of urgency. Just a soft ripple in the pattern of your hours. You rise, smooth your cot, and begin the slow work of composing your final garment. The gown of embroidered sins. This is not a punishment. This is a record. You retrieve the silks and threads you've kept folded in a hollowed book beneath the ledgers. Some you dyed yourself. Moss green for jealousy, dust grey for passive cruelty. A single crimson thread for the moment you punished too quickly. Each sin is not described, but symbolized. An image, a pattern, a pause. A crooked spoon, a drooping tulip, an empty chair facing the wrong direction. You sew for days, and when the gown is complete, it does not glisten. It does not gleam. It simply breathes. You wear it for the first time at dusk, as the bells toll in slow intervals from the Tower of Deferred Judgments. You are not summoned. You simply arrive, standing before the court, in silence. And slowly, they rise, one by one. Each courtier, each steward, each soft-voiced arbiter. No clapping, no murmurs, just stillness. You perform no ritual. You offer no final words. You bow. Not from the waist, but from the heart. And they bow in return. You are led, barefoot, to the small chapel beneath the western wing. the chapel of survived faults. The room is circular, lined with niches holding folded masks, scorched scrolls, dried flowers from failed reconciliations. You kneel on a cushion, worn thin by decades of penitence. And there, with only the creak of wooden beams above, you are given your final rite, the whisper of removal. It is not spoken aloud. It is thought in unison, a collective farewell carried on the breath of memory. You feel it settle on your skin like ash, warm, faint, dissolving. The next morning, your room is empty. The card is gone. The ledger's sealed. Your gown, however, remains, folded and placed in the vault of embodied corrections, beside the salt sandal and the napkin stitched with "not yet." A small plaque is added, not with your name, but with a single line: "She carried our weight until it disappeared." Years pass. New arbiters rise, new rituals form. Some borrow your gestures, others reject them. That is as it should be. But late at night, when punishment begins to feel too sharp, too fast, too loud, someone will speak your title, the quiet curator, and in that moment, your presence returns. Not as judgment nor instruction, but as the brief stillness before forgiveness takes root. You were born under banners too heavy to lift. You lived through corrections too subtle to name. And you passed on not in exile nor disgrace, but in the softest form of legacy. Now with your story laid gently to rest, you feel your breath slow, the room around you softening like parchment beneath lamplight. You're no longer in a court filled with veiled punishments or mirrored apologies. You're somewhere quieter now, just you, the sound of your breath, and the soft memory of forgiveness folding itself around your shoulders like a well-worn shawl. There are no more rituals to perform, no masks to wear, no scrolls to consult, only the echo of your own footsteps fading into corridors that no longer need to record them. Your hands, which once stitched contrition into silk and bent spoons into symbols, now rest gently atop the fabric of rest itself. Loose, open, unburdened. Outside the high windows of your memory, the sky darkens into the deepest navy. A breeze carries through, not cold, not warm, just reassuring. You might almost think it's carrying a scent. Lavender, perhaps, or the faintest trace of parchment glue. But that too begins to fade, until all that remains is the weight of your body, slowly melting into the softness of your mattress. No one will call for you. No one will need you to arrange chairs, tilt cups, or whisper apologies into the folds of a ritual. You've done enough. You've softened the edges. You've brought silence to places that had too much noise, and presence to places that had forgotten how to feel seen. Let go now. Let the final pages turn without effort. Let your name be carried not on paper, but in gestures passed from hand to hand, face to face, heart to heart. You may sleep now. There are no more corrections to make, no more bells to chime. Just the long, slow quiet of having been enough. Just the hush that follows a life lived gently. Sleep, you are not forgotten. You are not unfinished. You are simply still.